Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we are joined by the one and only Tim Moen of the Libertarian Party of Canada, who, by the way, is a paramedic, a fireman, and a principled anarchist, despite the fact that he is the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada, and we're going to go into that shortly. First of all, thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, always a pleasure, Josh. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but the world is a little strange right now. There's some strange stuff happening, and Canada has been pretty hard hit by, I guess the word for it would be tyranny in recent months. I wanted to first ask you, before we get into anything regarding, the gun confiscation or attack on gun rights that came down today, right before we started this interview. I want to first ask you about the whole situation in general. How do you diagnose the current state and future fate of Canada as far as freedom goes versus this so-called pandemic?
Well, I mean, it certainly has diminished my confidence in my countrymen. I'll tell you that. I've always said government's downstream of culture, and what the government's doing right now seems to be exactly what the culture wants right now. It is a good time to be a pearl clutching Karen. Let me tell you, this is their time to shine right now. It's really disheartening. I'm more afraid of what I'm seeing in culture than I am of this virus.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone is just obeyed. They're just going into their home and locking themselves in their kennel like good slaves at this point. I mean, we have the Tam, who is calling for mandatory vaccines. We're looking at potentially being stuck in our homes for many more months, possibly. I mean, they just keep extending the lockdown. I mean, how do you think people are going to react after a couple more months goes by like this?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, we're already starting to see some people push back against this. So that's one thing that is heartening to see. So maybe I should hope for a longer lockdown so that people really feel the pain of this government life stoppage. But there are still the Karens of the world out there saying, well, I mean, I had one fellow paramedic basically chastise me, right, to stand on her moral soapbox and say, how can you call yourself a healthcare practitioner? I posted an article that was somewhat that was basically pointing out that Stockholm seems to be the only place that doesn't have Stockholm syndrome right now. And they seem to be doing all right. It hasn't become the catastrophe. It's beaten the best case scenario that the models predicted, even though they haven't had these lockdowns. And I think that's something to be hopeful about. And just posting something like that inflames people, and they call you down. So I'm a little bit worried about how enamored with government people have become, and how they just assume that state violence is the way we solve all these problems and deal with pandemics and viruses and everything else in this world. I saw a C.S. Lewis quote today that said something like that: there's nothing worse than tyranny by people that have good intentions, let's say, that have your good in mind. At least the robber barons and the highwaymen, at a certain point, their torment stops. I mean, they are satiated by their plunder or whatever. But these people, they're never satisfied because their conscience never bothers them. They feel like they are completely in the moral right to do this. So, right. It exposes also the just poor lack of clear thinking that's out there. That there's no one can tell me what metrics they would accept to open up society again. They say with a 3% fatality rate, we have to shut it down. Well, what about a 0.1% fatality rate? Is that okay? Then that's the common flu. We lose people every year from that. Presumably, whatever lockdown would work for COVID would also work for the common flu to save that 0.1% of deaths that happen. Why wouldn't we advocate it for then? So they seem okay with 0.1% death, but not okay with 3%. Well, what's the cutoff? Where is that? No one has thought
Yeah.
clearly enough to tell me that.
Can you
They can't answer
imagine,
that
Tim?
question.
Can you imagine if they originally came to us and said, well, actually, the mortality rate might even be as low as 0.08%. I mean, if
So you're saying someone would die, Josh, if
yeah,
we end this
someone
lockdown? Well,
might.
we can't allow that then, right?
I wonder what the
Yeah, and of
mortality
course,
rate is at the hands of government.
yeah, it's pretty high. But from my perspective, I try to look at this and grapple with it from a libertarian or a principled perspective, right? And obviously, if someone is obviously sick with a threatening virus, okay, I can make the case that that person should be quarantined. We can use force protectively to protect others from that. But the problem is that this virus is asymptomatic. So when I leave my house and go grocery shopping, I am accepting a risk, the same risk that I'm imposing on others. I'm also accepting, and I think that's a pretty good principle to go by. Like I can't complain if I get sick. It's my responsibility. It's my fault if I get sick, if I leave my house. And I'm willing to take that responsibility on. And I just would like government to allow us to be adults here and manage our own personal risk, our own personal responsibility.
Yeah, but we can't be adults when we're the children of the all-loving government. And this is one of the things you mentioned, Sweden, right. And obviously Sweden is in the middle of the pack for European countries percentage-wise, but they didn't shut down for the most part. And now, strangely, the World Health Organization is actually endorsing a lot of what Sweden's doing. After all of this talk about how we must shut down, we must lock down, we shouldn't have a choice in this matter, and then originally being the exact opposite again, and they say, hug a Chinese person day, don't worry about it. I mean, these are the guys that are working with the communist Chinese government at the United Nations, and they are dictating so much of what we're seeing in Canada. In some cases, Canada has been following what the World Health Organization has been saying as far as National Guard possibly going door to door and checking on people and possibly splitting up families. I mean, what do you think about this level of tyranny in the age of 2020?
Well, I think it's terrible. And I think it's also, it's a natural state of where we all predict statism ends, right? I mean, we are hopeful that we can turn the tide. We go out there and we do things like run as candidates for the Libertarian Party, and we put out podcasts and we do live streams and we do journalism. And the hope is to connect people with some principle and some truth and some philosophy and persuade them to disabuse themselves of statism. But we also are pragmatic and we're realists, and we understand that, look, it's very difficult for people to do that. It's very difficult for people to get off welfare, to get off statism. The incentives just aren't aligned with that. And so inevitably we predict chaos and we predict a growing call for the state. And when people are afraid, they don't demand liberty, they demand security, and they demand more government. And I mean, we saw this in 2016 when the migrant crisis were all over the media. People were getting scared and demanding government lock down the borders, and this kind of explains how Trump got elected. And all these populists that are big on borders. People are scared of climate catastrophe, so they demand government do something. And this one is a very visceral and immediate fear, because if I leave my house, I could get this virus if government doesn't do something, is the common thought. And if I'm feeling unsafe about this virus, I'm going to call for more government, unless I am rooted in philosophy and unless I have a way of managing my fear and taking personal responsibility myself. And so we predicted that this would happen.
Blame climate change for this.
Right. Of course that's going to happen. Or we'd be idiots if we didn't see how they're going to use this to bolster climate change. They're going to say, look, this huge government collective action, this lockdown, this life stoppage where we stop burning so many fossil fuels, had a positive effect on the environment. It worked to stop COVID. COVID stopped because the government stopped it, right? So we need to do the same for climate change.
But on the other side, Tim, then they're going to say afterwards, but there's all this new starvation worldwide because the economy is collapsing. But no, that's climate change. Climate change caused all this starvation to happen. So they're going to play both sides for sure.
Yeah, well, it's the climate change and the billionaires and all the wealthy people hoarding their wealth. That's why people are starving. And so what we need to do is tax even more to solve that. So there will always be a crisis that people will beg government to fix. And of course, they can't look in the mirror and notice that they are contributing. They're the problem in the first place. They're the ones that are asking for this, and the unintended consequences of them asking for that is there's more negative unintended consequences. And then they ask for more government and they get even more negative unintended consequences. So it's a self-feeding, self-perpetuating positive feedback loop that just kind of grows and grows until it eventually bursts into a bubble of chaos. That's what we libertarians have kind of been predicting for years is going to happen. Eventually society has to break down because of these bubbles of chaos that the government creates and supports and inflates. And, you know, unfortunately that's going to happen. And so that can be scary for libertarians who see this happening. And it certainly scares me to see people just accepting this tyranny. But at the same time, you know, if we are able to see this happening, we can leverage it to our advantage, right? And we can flourish despite all this by taking personal responsibility in our own life. And I know,
right, and that's always the answer to, fly to Mexico in my case. Well, that's always the end goal, is that we want a personal responsibility, and that is just a basis of freedom itself. It's a basis of humanity. But I do want to ask you a little bit about how Canadians are ranked at the top for snitching on their neighbors right now. There are countless Canadians that are actually calling the police, endangering them with possible COVID, by the way, because cops without masks show up with guns and touch you everywhere and shoot your dog. But so this is what I wanted to ask you about. I mean, do we have to worry about these kinds of people in the future, even in an anarchist society, that are going to think that they know everything about a certain situation because the TV told them, so they're going to call the police and endanger lives of families under the guise of saving those families?
Yeah, I think moral busybodyism, Karenism, will be a lot less in a stateless society, because in order to get to a stateless society, we have to have a tipping point of people that accept personal responsibility and fiercely protect it and insist on it. And that just doesn't go very well with moral busybodyism. You know, if people are dying, these moral busybodies say it's because some teens are hanging out at the skate park or something like that, that granny got COVID in a nursing home. You know, it's just very poor thinking, right? And so, I mean, the only hope is that we get over that type of thing in order to achieve statelessness. So, you know, I think that unless you have a culture that has kind of purged itself of these Karens, you know, or let's say this, that Karens purge themselves of their own Karenism, that we'll never get to that stateless society. But that's not to say,
you know, it's 20 sorry, but you know, it's 2020 when we have terms like Karenism.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know, is it racist to say that? I don't know. Maybe it's unfair to Karens everywhere.
White people.
But,
it's not a whole lot of non-white Karens. So you know, I wanted to also mention, because speaking of the Karenism, and I apologize to all the good people out there named Karen. There's the issue at hand here is that we have all these people. I've never seen so much virtue signaling in my life, and I use that very, very affirmatively, because we have people literally calling themselves heroes. I stayed at home. I'm a hero. They're propping up their own ego so much by sitting at home and listening to the government. It's scary. But with that said, they think that they're saving lives. And now let's go into that a little bit. As far as saving lives, we'll go into the economic in a moment. But is it really saving lives? Now, you're a paramedic. Obviously, you're not an immunologist or a virologist or an epidemiologist, but you're a paramedic and you deal in health. And it's one of the things I have to ask is, I mean, are these lockdowns really helping people stay alive in this crisis?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, that, look, like I said, if you get the virus, it's kind of on you, right? And so if you want to 100% guarantee you never get the virus, stay isolated in your room, never leave your house, and you can avoid getting it. If you go outside, if you go to crowded places, you might get the virus. Okay. And now that's on you, whether that was worth it or not. I think you're an adult and you can make that decision. Maybe you need to eat. Maybe you need that to survive. Right. And so it's staying home saves your own life. But it's not doing anything really for anyone else. You go into the grocery store, isn't putting a granny in harm's way from my perspective, because for that granny to get the virus, she either has to come out of her nursing home or has to have someone come into her nursing home and violate her property rights. And I would assume, if I was 90 years old and I had a bunch of comorbidities, I would have caregivers around me that were using precautions to make sure I never got the virus. So if I got the virus, it's on those people that had a duty to care for me, that I hired to care for me, that it's their fault, not the kids at the skate park, not the people leaving their homes. It's those caregivers that need to be held responsible. But also, I think that, look, if I'm a 90-year-old great grandfather and I maybe have a year to live and I'm kind of sick and I don't have long for this world, I'm probably going to want to risk getting the virus to hug my family and be near my family in the last year of my life. And I'm willing to accept the risk of a slightly shorter life by a few months to be able to be surrounded by loved ones. So I also think those people ought to be allowed to take risks as well. And it's
crazy that we even have to say someone needs to be allowed to take risks. I mean, allowed by whom? That's the question.
Yeah, well, and that's it. And I mean, no one would advocate banning highways, I don't think, even though we have, multiple fatalities on there every year, right? People, we accept that there's a risk when we travel on the highway, and we don't blame everyone else if we get in a car accident. We've accepted that risk, and that's that. We don't advocate for banning things. So, that's kind of how I look at this. I don't think you staying home is saving lives. In fact, I don't think I'm not convinced that healthcare is doing a lot to save lives in this pandemic either. It certainly has saved some lives, but your chance of dying from this goes from maybe like 99.5% to 99.6% if healthcare is available, if you have high quality healthcare, right? I mean, if you get sick enough that you require a ventilator, you're probably going to die. That's what the stats are saying, that there's an 80% chance or higher that you're going to die. Despite everything that healthcare can do for you, you're going to die. And it seems like people often, make a lot of, and this is just something I've learned in 25 plus years of being a paramedic. There are very few cases where I actually save a life. If it's someone's time to go, it's their time to go. Sometimes I can make a difference, but most of the times I can't. And the difference I make is I hold their hand, I explain to them what's going on, I try to make them comfortable. I make their life a little bit better for the short time I have with them. I take a burden off their family and all those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it's not clear that this disease care is the most important factor in surviving this. It's probably having a healthy body, having good habits, having a healthy lifestyle, having good nutrition, that sort of thing that matters.
Right, it's
more
a
than
precursor.
Anything.
And I mean, in a lot of cases, and of course, this is a very tragic issue. I think it's weaponized and all that kind of stuff, and we could go all into that. But what I think is important here is that if a person that's 95 that has lung cancer wants to go eat at a restaurant, as terrible as it is, I'm sorry, but I mean, should we shut down millions of jobs because those people want to take that risk? And if people want to take risks upon themselves, life is a risk. You face 1,000 ways to die every time you go outside and walk down the streets. So, I mean, we face death left and right. It's a miracle that we can even live as long as we do these days. And I want to ask, I mean, with all these Karens that we're talking about, saying, well, we're saving lives. Well, what about saving lives in the future here? We're talking about an economic depression on a global scale that we're walking into, and economic depression's poverty kills way more than anyone. What do you think? I mean, the Canadian interest rates are at 0.25% right now. I mean, it's insane what we're witnessing, and the oil is crashing.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. No, I just wanted to touch on, because it struck me when you said, if I'm 95 and I can't go to a restaurant, I mean, in the last year of my life, that's a pretty important year. Like I want to go out on my terms and I want to enjoy my life for as little time I have on earth. And so this is really adversely affecting seniors from that perspective, not having that kind of freedom. But also the other people that I worry about is the children, right? Who are now locked down, who can't enjoy the summer, who can't, their lives, and with the fire department, we're doing all these drive-by birthday things putting on our lights, saying happy birthday from the street kind of thing. These kids are stuck at home. They can't celebrate with their friends. They can't have the kind of socialization they want. And this, I mean, my childhood, like I have the fondest memories. It goes so fast, and it's there for kids to develop and grow and enjoy and have good memories. And that's kind of being robbed from them now in a disproportionate way. Like I'm middle-aged. I can handle staying indoors. I mean, my life hasn't actually changed all that much from before the lockdown. But it's these people like at either end of the life spectrum that I worry about are really getting robbed here. So I just wanted to point that out. But yeah, your point about—
By the way, I'm protesting every day and disobeying by sitting on a beach. Very illegal in Mexico. I'm not endorsing anything, YouTube, so don't take down this video, which you probably will anyway. But yeah, I'm getting a nice tan from this whole quarantine thing.
Beautiful. Lots of vitamin D. Yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah, no, but this lockdown, you know, I made the point, I wrote an article. I've got a new website out. It's timmoen.net. And I've been doing a bit of blogging, and I wrote an article on there called "Let's Treat the Flu Like Corona," right? In which I say, okay, we all the things that are saving COVID lives right now are likely to save flu lives. So what's your excuse for not using the same thing, same exact strategies to prevent flu deaths? And you know, and I make the case, obviously we shouldn't shut down the economy during COVID or during the flu, because we need to be able to live our lives. We need to be able to produce things for people. We need to be able to trade. We need to be able to make decisions as adults. And I pointed out that you know, what we're seeing now is a huge transfer of wealth and power from the lower classes to this, both the state and its kind of crony corporations that are attached to it. So at the same time, we're demolishing small business, mom and pop shops, and destroying their lives. And we're wiping out the competition for bigger corporations that produce the same things as these mom and pop shops. And so we're increasing their profit margins there. The banks are going to get bailed out, but homeowners who can't pay their mortgage aren't going to get bailed out. And what happens to the title of their home? It goes to the bank. So the banks are getting all this property plus getting bailed out. And where does the money for the bailout for the banks come from? It comes from us, from future generations, from having our buying power robbed through inflation, through this tax that basically goes to the bank. And you know, so they're ending up with everything. And we're left having to work. We're basically sentenced to perpetual indentured servitude to mega corporations, government, and the banks because of this thing.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how all these big monopolies that the left says they hate, suddenly Walmart's open and the family food grocery stores are shut down because of risk of COVID? I mean, how does that work? That sounds like monopolization to me.
Because you're not killing grannies when you go to Walmart, but you are when you go to your comic book store or something like that, right?
Yeah. Or a golf course.
Right. It's ridiculous thinking, right? And so, yeah. And then I look at my dad, who had just sold his farmland prior to this COVID thing happening. And he put it in a ultra conservative, like, mutual fund to fund his retirement and the rest of his life, basically. And it took a huge hit in the stock market. He lost, 7% of its value. Is like that South Park episode and it's gone.
And it's gone.
Well, how is that going to affect his health and his ability to be cared for in the future? Now he's relying on his savings and the wealth he's accumulated in his life and been super responsible about doing. And that wealth is being stripped from him as well. And now, how's he going to protect himself from pathogens as he becomes more immunocompromised and develops comorbidities and becomes more fragile going forward? How's he going to be able to put nutritious food on his table? How's he going to be able to hire caregivers and that sort of thing? So these are all obviously shutting down people's lives has negative long-term effects. And we can't predict what those are, but I have to imagine that morbidity rates and mortality rates in general are going to start to rise because of the government shutdown. Nothing to do with, just outside the virus. We're going to start to see a rise, and we're already starting to see that. I mean, we're seeing more and more, and I'm seeing this at my work too. I had a guy the other day who had snorted crystal meth, fentanyl, cocaine, and GHB. And I went to go help him, and he tried to ward me away with the sign of the cross like I was a vampire. He didn't want to get the Rona from me. He was more worried about getting Corona from me than he was about the fentanyl, the black market fentanyl he just snorted. You know, and so multiply that by all the people that might have a legitimate healthcare concern that can save their life, and they're not going to seek help because they're worried about going to emerge departments. I can't remember it ever being slower in my career than right now. Like it's been quiet. It's been eerily quiet. You know, we're not going, you know, people, I had 2 old ladies, you know, one with atrial fibrillation and another one was having some chest discomfort or something like that. I mean, the underlying pathologies here could kill these ladies, right? But they were nervous about going to the hospital. They weren't sure they wanted to go and get checked out.
Right.
So how many people are dying because they're not getting the surgery they need? They're not getting the health care they need because they're too scared to go to the hospital. There are all sorts of negative unintended consequences. I've had people reach out to me.
And how many of them that are going to the hospitals and are getting the surgeries and die during the surgeries are getting COVID-19 written on their death certificate?
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I talked to an ER doc in BC, and he was explaining how these death certificates work. And there's kind of a primary cause of death, and then there's the contributing factors, I guess, or something like that, right? So so, you know, if someone dies of cancer, but their life was shortened by COVID-19, COVID-19 might be a contributing factor, right, on that. But when they do the stats, what they're doing is they're looking through, was COVID-19 involved at all in this? And so that gets chalked up as in the death count number for COVID-19. So it seems like, you know, and I mean, yeah, I mean, it overblows how fatal this thing is, but you know, I can also understand to some extent why they do it like that, you know, but obviously the state always is going to skew things from a bias of we need more power. And this is why the models have all wildly overprojected how bad this virus is going to be. I mean, even the best case scenarios, we're beating those. We're beating the best case scenarios that these modelers predicted, that they scared us with, that scared us into accepting these lockdowns.
Well, and I mean, let's get it straight. I mean, even Bill Gates himself said 2 weeks ago that the virus won't kill as many people as he thought, and the shutdowns are likely to kill millions and millions of people. Well, that's already way more than the virus has killed. So basically, he's saying that the shutdowns will kill more people, and yet we need to continue the shutdowns. Governments are listening to them.
It is, you know, I was going to write an article explaining that there's never going to be a safe time to end the lockdowns, right? As soon as we end any lockdowns, we can expect COVID deaths to rise, whether it's now or 20 years from now. And so, you know, what do people who are worried about COVID-19 have to say about that? Do they want a lockdown in perpetuity? And if they don't want a lockdown in perpetuity, if they don't want a 20-year lockdown, what do they recommend? And they have no answer. They're just basically, well, trust the government, trust authorities, trust science. Okay, well, what does science say? You know, I asked this to a guy the other day. I said, what does science say about whether I should quit my job or not? You know, I'm a paramedic. I'm going into the heart of this epidemic, going into viral loads, let's say. Sounds kind of dirty, but what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go to work, or should I stay home? Right? What does science say about that? Well, science has nothing to say about what I ought to do. All it can tell me is the facts. Here's what we think based on the science is the fatality rate and your risk with COVID-19. And I know what the risk of unemployment is to me. Now I weigh the risk of unemployment with the risk of that I'm going to get COVID, and I'm going with the COVID all day long, because that is almost no risk to me, whereas unemployment is a huge risk to me.
Mm-hmm. And to most people, and it's funny watching all these people that they don't like their jobs. They think that getting a handout from the government is going to keep them afloat, even though, I mean, Trudeau's saying we're going to pay people's rents. That literally means the government owns your property, by the way. I mean, that's communism. Right. And on top of that, they're like, well, we don't care. We need to stay home and stay safe. All these people with jobs that actually work and don't want a handout and just want to get their life back to normal are going, well, you can say that. You stay at home if you want, take welfare if you want. I'm going to work because the whole system's collapsing because of this. And the mortality rate among people that are impoverished, and there's a health crisis involved there too, as you kind of alluded there too, is that if people are poor, the poor have less or shorter lifespans. And obviously that also is a scourge on the healthcare system long term. And they're printing all this money. The oil market's completely collapsing. Interest rates are already at zero. They can't lower interest rates anymore other than going into the negatives. It's ridiculous. This in every way is going to cause way more deaths. And there's absolutely no doubt about it. But people don't understand economics. They don't understand the most basic forms of economics. And they just watch as this happens and say they're saving lives. They're like Ralph Wiggum basically saying, I'm helping. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I'm getting messages from, I've got at least 2 messages from people reaching out because they're thinking about suicide. Right. And it's just, it's a terrible thing. And, you know, these are, I just don't know what to make of that. There was an ER doc from New York that recently killed herself. And of course the media is spinning it as it was the stuff she saw on her job that led to stress that killed her. But, you know, if you actually read the article, she had been sent home because she had contracted COVID. She wanted to go back to work after that, but then they sent her home again to be with her parents. And while she was there, she killed herself. So, I mean, couldn't you just as easily argue that maybe you stripped from her the one thing that provided her meaning, going to work?
Yeah.
And, I mean,
suicide, drugs, crime, poverty, hunger, all these things add up from the current situation we're in. And suicides are skyrocketing in Queens, New York right now, which I've seen. Countless people staying in their home. They're not getting vitamin D, which is important to your mental health in many ways. They're just stuck inside and they end up killing themselves because they walk outside and some jackboot cops start screaming at them and threatening them.
Yeah. And some cops I know have been telling me that domestic assaults are off the charts right now. Like their domestic violence units are just swamped. Like,
and child abuse too. Massive rise in child abuse right now because kids that don't want to be anywhere near certain people are stuck in homes with abusers. I mean, it's tragic, and people don't want to see that because all they want to see is the media told them, the WHO told them, the CDC, the Canadian government, TAM, Fauci, whoever it might be, said
it's science. It's science, Josh.
And apparently that's consensus, which goes against science itself too. But with that said, right before we went, we did this video today. Breaking news came out that Trudeau is banning 1,500 types of so-called assault-style weapons. Now, this is perfect in a situation where everyone's desperate, everyone's dependent. The last bit of defense they have against a tyrannical government and their last form of defense against possibly food rioters because people can't feed themselves is taken away, and no one can protest. It's illegal to protest. What do you make of this of this recent news?
Yeah, well, it's obviously political opportunism at its finest. You know, that this played right into the hands of liberals, the gun grabbers. I mean, they couldn't have asked for better conditions to do this gun grab, and that just goes to show you how politicians grab power. You know, I mean, well, the income tax, it was essentially sold as an emergency measure to pay for a world war, and you know, we still have it 100 years later. So government powers come in, but they're very difficult to get rid of. So yeah, I mean, this ban is exactly what the liberals said. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, it's an assault style ban. You know, we already know that assault weapons are banned in Canada. You know, the select fire, fully automatic type weapons have always been banned, but now they're targeting assault style. And I just did a little digging to try to figure out what that even means. They name specific guns, but it's not a functional ban. It's not like they're banning semi-automatics as a class, center fire semi-automatics like New Zealand did. They're listing specific rifles, and they're all rifles that look like they're dressed up to look like military guns or something. It's a style ban. If your rifle does the same thing as an AR-15, but it looks like a hunting rifle, you're good. So it's just, it is.
Yeah, well, and they went after the AR-15, calling it military grade, which every time I hear them call an AR-15 military grade, yeah, there are places, there are militaries in the world that utilize AR-15s, but
Sure.
it's not a military grade rifle. I mean, if
Right.
they look scarier than they are, folks. You shoot an AR-15, they're not as scary as they look for Canadians out there that don't shoot. But to
Yeah.
me,
I
this is
mean,
just the last line of defense.
yeah, and it's going to expose all sorts of flaws because what's to stop someone from producing what's essentially an AR-15, but calling it something different and making it look like a hunting rifle? Is that thing going to be banned now? Obviously not, right? So it's you can't respect this legislation on any level. Like even if they were trying to, like, you could respect it somewhat if there was some function or principle that they were saying, if it meets this criteria, then we can't have it in Canada. Like, okay, I can get behind, a machine gun. Maybe people shouldn't be walking around with fully automatic machine guns in an urban area, for example. Maybe you should only have it on your property or something.
Come on, I can't walk around with a bazooka in a neighborhood.
Yeah, right. So, but like New Zealand, they just said, if it's semi-automatic center fire, it's not allowed. So if anything that meets that functional criteria, okay, you can kind of see some rationale at least there. But this isn't even that. This is just, if your rifle is wearing blackface, like Trudeau did, it's banned.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, I'm just saying, and I'm taking a bit from a quote that you got very well known for many years ago. I just want gay married couples to protect their marijuana plants with their army tanks. Because at the end of the day, who kills more than any other entity in the world? It's the government. The government is the number one killer on the planet, the number one polluter on the planet, and the number one thief on the planet. And it's always rich to see people on the left and the right push for these entities to save us from the very things that they're the MVP of. So it's always a good time. I mean, look, this is the last line of defense. We have almost no lines of defense left, and without the guns, by the way, this is all because of what happened in Nova Scotia, and in Nova Scotia they used illegal guns, so I don't know how this affects anything or helps anything, but I mean, this is our last line of defense for free speech, which is almost wiped out in Canada, free media, which is almost wiped out in Canada, bailouts and everything, and preferred media companies by the government. Thanks, Trudeau. And, this is the last line of defense in our ability to protect ourselves in one of the most unprecedented, strangest Twilight Zone times ever in the history of humanity that we're currently living in. We're living history every single day right now. And people are getting scared. And if you don't have food and there's food riots, look at what happened in Venezuela. I have to ask, with that going forward, is Canada done? Are we just like walking straight into a fascio communist Chinese style type government, or is there some silver lining here? Because it just looks to me like it goes from red coat to keep the red coat on and just change the flag on it to the Canadian flag, and now we're putting on a different kind of red coat with the stars and the communist symbol on it and walking straight to China.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hold out a lot of hope. I mean, I think I'm seeing a growing number of people become pushing back against government here. So that, so what will happen is that there's, it seems like a majority of the people are endearing themselves closer to government, saying, "Oh, thank you for saving us from this pandemic," and and now they're accepting all these things. It's going to be much easier to get things in like UBI and all these other things now that people are going to want, because that's essentially what we're getting now. People are getting used to not working and they're living comfortable. But then there's a segment of people that are furious about this and can't stand it. And at the same time, they're trying to take our guns and everything else. And they see this as tyranny. So my hope is to stay close to the people in the latter category and distance myself from people in the former. But this is obviously going to divide Canada even more. If you thought the political division was bad now, this is adding fuel to that political divide bigly. And we're in for some interesting times. I'm always hopeful. Like Canada itself, I don't even know how I would define Canada, or I can't think in terms of nation states, and assess how the nation state is doing, because I don't know what that means really. But I will say that myself and my family, I think we're going to be okay. I think we're going to find a way to flourish, buy silver, buy buy the things that are going to protect you from what's coming and help you even grow. If it weren't for this shutdown, I probably wouldn't have a website. So I'm just turning every piece of coal into diamond that I can. The government's trying to oppress me, but I'm turning that into opportunity. And I think that we just have to hold on to that kind of attitude. I don't know what the positive unintended consequences of that will be, but I think there will be positive unintended consequences. I think that for a select few people that see what's going on, that are taking personal responsibility, will be able to come through this all right. But make no mistake, there are going to be difficult days ahead. I think society is going to start to fracture. It's already starting to fracture. I think that's just going to get worse. Things are going to get chaotic, but that doesn't mean that we can't find our pockets of growth and flourishing and anarchy within that chaos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's order out of chaos for the government, but with chaos leads to a lot of great innovations. And in rough times, people really do rise up. It's that old saying, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And it goes in a circle. Yeah. But I think we're definitely in the hard times right now. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But it comes down to, instead of revolution, maybe we should be looking more into evolution. Like, for example, evolution by technology and by, innovation. What we're witnessing right now with guns, more people than ever can make them in their garage. I'm not endorsing anything. I'm just saying it's easier than ever to make guns in your garage. There's 3D printers that are just at the beginning of their evolutionary phase. And eventually those are going to get a lot better. So eventually government literally cannot keep up with the innovation, and they'll try everything they can to cling to their power, whatever the power they have left. I think there's hope long-term. Just right now, it's just, I'm so sick of it. I can't wait for this to end. I'm going crazy, but nonetheless, I do believe there's hope down the line, my friends. As we close this off, Tim, can you let everyone know what you're up to? You mentioned your website and obviously what the Libertarian Party of Canada is doing, because I know as a consistent, principled anarchist, many people will say, but he's running the Libertarian Party. How does that work? If any of you have seen our past interviews with Tim, you'll recognize that he's not a politician. But nonetheless, I wanted to hear what your upcoming projects are and what you're up to.
Yeah, well, I just started a website, timmoen.net, where you can find all my podcasts and a bunch of old videos, and I blog there regularly. I plan to add some other things in there, like merchandise and maybe a kind of a subscriber page for people that want to do Q&As. And I'm trying to focus more on personal development, and I'm finding that a lot of people are reaching out to me for coaching and advice and different things like that. A lot of people, there's such a lack of fatherhood in our society, a lack of positive masculine role models, that I think there's a real hunger for that. I mean, we saw this with Jordan Peterson. He was like everyone's dad, and everyone was like soaking up the advice. I've noticed that there's a market for that people are coming to me for, and I'm going to find a way to go there. So if you go to timmoen.net, you can sign up, you can subscribe, and you'll stay up to date with what I'm doing. But I'm looking at finding ways to help people gain more personal responsibility in their life, through coaching, through advice, through whatever, actual practical things they can do in their life right now that will make their life better, that will increase their liberty today kind of thing. So I'm kind of shifting away a little bit from the political lens, where I'm trying to look at the big system and create change in the big system, and focus more on what can I do for specific individuals in their own lives right now, because I think that will have the same effect, or maybe even more of an effect overall. So that's what I'm doing. The Libertarian Party of Canada, I mean, we were supposed to have a convention this May. We postponed that till later on. So
wouldn't that be a cool act if you just did it anyway? Just
well,
like, we're libertarian.
Maybe that's something we should think about. I was kind of relieved that it was put on hold, because just things have been busy for me lately at work and different things like that, and I am trying to decide whether this will be my last term. Nick Sarwark is resigning. We've kind of been, him and I have been leaders of our parties for the same amount of time. And it feels like maybe this is a good time to switch over away from the politics and start trying a different avenue of promoting liberty. It is a rough game. It's a soul-sucking game. And, even like today, I had a comment, someone said, I'm glad you're not my prime minister, your view on this. And I mean, that's just a constant everyday refrain that I get being in politics. People look at politicians or political figures as they're going to be a savior. Well, I'm not that guy. I'm not going to be your savior. I'm not going to pull some legislative levers and rule in some kind of way that's going to make that's going to relieve your anxiety. Right. I'm going to allow you to just take personal risks and personal responsibility. That's it. And I'm going to protect that. Most people don't want that. And I guess my point is it's hard to maintain positive attitude and motivation when you're constantly inundated with those kinds of messages. So I'll have to, I'm glad we postponed it, because it'll give me a little bit more time to think and reflect on, is this the path I want to continue on or not? So I guess it's good from that. But, I'll always have a place in my heart for the Libertarian Party. I think that what the people in my party do is wonderful. It's all volunteers, and these people all care about liberty and care about freeing Canada, and they're doing work. They're making all sorts of sacrifices to make it happen, and I'll always be thankful to the people that are doing that, even if my time is over. So, if you want to join the party, get involved, maybe be the next leader of the Libertarian Party, go to libertarian.ca and check us out.
Excellent. Well, it's always good talking with you, and always great insights and ideas that come from these conversations. And I definitely recommend everyone watching to go to timmoen.net. It's all linked below in the description. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and check back, because we're shadow banned and we can't do it without you guys tuning in and actually looking for our videos. You can look for an entire title of our videos, even with World Alternative Media after it on YouTube, and still not find it. So we need your help sharing and getting this stuff over social media. Anyway, Tim, I really appreciate you joining us today, and let's talk soon.
You bet. Thanks, Josh.
Like what you see here, OUR? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon, Subscribe Star. We really can't do it without you. We've been so insanely shadow banned, about 90% at this point, and 95% demonetized. As Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube, comes in and says that she is shutting down quote-unquote controversial content and cutting out the views on this controversial content by 70%. She's been bragging about it. We need your help more than ever in this battle for truth in information. You guys are what keeps us alive, so we really appreciate just even $1 a month makes a huge difference. If everyone could give just $1 a month, we wouldn't even have to worry about competing against a mainstream propaganda networks. You can also donate to our Bitcoin address on the screen for you to scan if you please, as well as in the comments and description. Liking and sharing makes a big difference as well, and finding us on alternative social media platforms like float.app, that's flote.app, makes a huge difference. We're at Josh Sigurdson as well as at Wham. Float is replacing Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Tumblr, Reddit, and Patreon all in one with encrypted private messaging, and of course monetization on videos for creators, live streams with super chats in crypto, and most of all, no algorithm, because at the end of the day, it's all about reach, guys. This is all about actually reaching people with the message and waking up the public. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Minds, BitChute, all sorts of different platforms. Try to follow us on as many things as possible, because very soon this channel will very likely just be completely deleted from YouTube, and you'll never see us again, and you'll be stuck with only the mainstream networks. Also, come on out and see us at Anarcho Vegas 2020 in Las Vegas, Nevada in July, where such speakers such as G. Edward Griffin and many others will be speaking. You could use promo code WHAM on your VIP tickets and save 10%, as well as buy extremely cheap tickets for just $20 $1.20. You won't find a cheaper conference than this with such amazing names. Check anarchovegas.com for more information on that. We hope to see you out there. And anyway, I really appreciate all of you guys joining us. You make it possible for us to survive in this volatile, propagandized climate. Until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.